Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned to give you our weekend reading report. Yes, it's the weekend reading report where I tell you all the exciting things I read last week and some of the stuff I'm going to be reading in the future, and some things that just showed up at the manor by magic, stuff like that. So, let's get started. What did I read last week? Well, I made a wee bit of progress on the 500 book challenge, the challenge where I'm reading 500 books that I own before I will buy any new ones. And book number 47 I completed. It was pretty short, so it's not much of an accomplishment. But book number 47 in the challenge is this book I finished this week, The Maneater by Edgar Rice Burroughs. This is part of the Edgar Rice Burroughs deep dive. I'm reading all of Edgar Rice Burroughs' books, more or less in the order that he wrote them. And this was the one that was due up next, The Maneater. Now, this is a book I have never read before, because when I was reading Edgar Rice Burroughs for the first time, I read every book I can get my hands on when I was reading Edgar Rice Burroughs for the first time, but I could never get my hands on this because it was like 35 years ago, 40 years ago, something like that. Not quite 40 years, but it was a while ago that I first read Edgar Rice Burroughs. And at that time, there were no ebooks, there were no print-on-demand books that I'm aware of. There was no internet. I mean, there was no way to get this story because this was not an Edgar Rice Burroughs story that was reprinted like every other book that he wrote was reprinted all the time. This one, no, and it's pretty clear why that is. When I was reading this, I kind of thought, that's why I've never read this book before. So, the book itself, as an adventure story, is okay. It's not bad. It's a not bad adventure story by Edgar Rice Burroughs. It's not part of any of his series. It's not part of Tarzan or Barsoom or any of those. It's just a little adventure story. And as an adventure story, yeah, it's okay. The most interesting character in this is a man-eating lion, hence the title, The Maneater. It's a lion, and he's kind of the hero of the story, actually. The lion is kind of the hero. He's certainly the most interesting character. True, he does eat people, but no one's perfect. No one's perfect, Roger. I mean, still, the lion is the most interesting character. The reason this has not been reprinted, though, I believe, is because it is almost certainly Edgar Rice Burroughs' most racist book. So Edgar Rice Burroughs, he was writing 100 years ago. He wrote this 100 years ago. And he was very much a product of his time. Middle-class white guy who pretty much thought he was only writing, I guess, for other middle-class white guys. All his stories were published in popular publications, pulp magazines, and so forth. So this shouldn't surprise me considering when it was written. But while Edgar Rice Burroughs' books do contain period racism, you'll find that in the Tarzan novels, you'll find it in other places. But at other times, Edgar Rice Burroughs can almost seem progressive for his time. Particularly if you read the Barsoom novels. I mean, those novels are all about different people from different cultures and of different colors who are all, who are working together. Usually they're working together to fight other people, but, that was a definite theme in those early Barsoom books. And, on Mars, Barsoom is the Martians' name for Mars. On Mars, you have red people, you have white people, you've got black people, you've got yellow people. You've got all kinds of different people. You've got the green Martians with the 4 arms and the tusks and all that. who are 15 feet tall. And all of these Martians, none of them seem superior or inferior to anybody else. They're all just people, and they're presented that way. There is no, as far as I can discern, racism on Mars. Everybody is pretty much equal, really. And nobody is depicted as superior. So, on Earth, apparently it's different. Because this book, it starts off, well, a lot of it takes place in Africa, like the Tarzan novels do. And so, of course, you have African natives who are depicted as savages, because of course they are. But the real trouble doesn't happen until you get back to the United States, which the end of this book takes place in the United States. And there are African Americans in this book, and they are not treated well. They are treated mostly for comedy. They are comedy relief. Edgar Rice Burroughs refers to them at 2 points, I believe, as darkies. Yeah, it's that kind of thing. So it was kind of a surprise, because usually racial slurs and that kind of thing, you'll find them in Edgar Rice Burroughs, but usually it's the villains saying these things. In this book, the narrator of the story uses the term darkies, and certainly the African Americans in this book are, like I said, straight up comedy relief. It is an unfortunate portrayal, to say the least, but I'm glad I read it. Because it's, this is not something I would have expected, but it's important to know. I'm a huge fan, of course, of Edgar Rice Burroughs, love Edgar Rice Burroughs' books, but, like I said, he very much was a man of his time, writing 100 years ago. And unfortunately, this kind of thing did not raise any eyebrows 100 years ago. Like I've said before, these old novels, these old books, they're not just entertainment anymore. They're also historical documents that record the attitudes of the people who lived and wrote at this time. And a lot of people were really, really, really racist back then. And that does help us understand the racism that exists in our society today. Things have gotten better from this time. We have a long way to go, but it's certainly easier to understand why we are where we are when we see the attitudes of people 100 years ago. So the book itself was okay, and that's about all I have to say about book number 47. Then I moved on to book number 48 on the challenge, and that was this one, The Shadow. This was the first Shadow adventure for the pulp hero, The Shadow. For the pulp adventure challenge that I've got going, the pulp adventure project that I have going on. So this was one of the old Pyramid paperbacks, the old paperback reprints of the Shadow magazine. The Shadow, who also existed on the radio at this time, although most Shadow purists prefer the pulp character. They're kind of night and day, these two characters. They were very different from each other. And most Shadow fans consider the pulp Shadow to be the genuine article. I certainly do. As much as I like the radio show, this was the real deal. The Shadow, the mysterious Shadow. It's certainly in this, the first Shadow adventure. We know nothing about the Shadow. This is not an origin story for the Shadow. The Shadow is already operating in New York, but we know nothing about him. And in the beginning of the story, Harry Vincent, a young man, Harry Vincent, who's had a tough time and is very depressed. Harry Vincent is about to commit suicide and jump off a bridge. And just as he's doing this, he is pulled back from the brink of death by the Shadow. The Shadow basically drags him off the bridge, throws him in a car, and they drive away. And the Shadow tells him, hey, I just saved your life. Now your life belongs to me. And he makes Harry Vincent an agent of the Shadow. And there's this great scene when the Shadow has just saved him, and they're in the car together, and Harry Vincent's trying to check out the Shadow, but the Shadow's all in black with the slouch hat, and he can't really get a look at the Shadow. And Harry Vincent's like, damn, what's going on? And Harry Vincent says, perhaps I did fall from the bridge, and this is death that I am now experiencing. Yet it seems real after all. What good is my life to anyone? What will you do with it? And the Shadow says, I shall improve it, replied the voice from the darkness. I shall make it useful, but I shall risk it too. Perhaps I shall lose it, for I have lost lives, just as I have saved them. This is my promise, life with enjoyment, with danger, with excitement, and with money. Life above all, with honor. But if I give it, I demand obedience, absolute obedience. You may accept my terms, or you may refuse. I shall wait for you to choose. So Harry Vincent decided to become an agent of the Shadow. That was his choice. One wonders what the Shadow would have done if he had made another choice. Would the Shadow have just stopped the car and tossed Harry Vincent off the bridge? Who knows? But Harry Vincent becomes an agent of the Shadow, which is interesting. He gets his instructions from the Shadow, usually in messages or over the telephone, and the messages are always in code. And he, gets himself in all these adventures and throws himself into all this danger, never really knowing why he's doing any of it. Because he doesn't know anything about the Shadow. He doesn't know if this guy is a criminal. He doesn't know if he's a terrorist. He doesn't know anything. We do meet another agent of the Shadow in this book. He knows a little bit more, but not much. He doesn't know much about the Shadow either. And as a reader of this magazine at the time, you only learn about the Shadow slowly. Over a long period of time, you learn a little bit more and a little bit more about the Shadow. In this book, the Shadow is usually in the background. He'll show up here and there, often to save Harry Vincent from getting himself killed. But over the course of the magazine's history, the Shadow takes, he's more in center stage more often. And we do learn more about the character. Although, do we? He's so mysterious that the information that you get on the Shadow, you can never quite trust. He's a fascinating character, and this was an excellent introduction. This was a lot of fun. So this is the next thing I read. Then I read something that I didn't expect to read. Book number 49 on the challenge. I read this one too this week. This is All of the Marvels by Douglas Woke, which is an interesting book. This guy, Douglas Woke, he read every Marvel comic between 1962, from the first issue of the Fantastic Four, all the way up through 2017. A certain issue in 2017. So he read a ton. He read every single Marvel superhero comic book, or any comic book that was related to the Marvel superhero continuity. That's a lot of comic books. Apparently he read them all. Apparently. And apparently this project took him 2 years to do. And I'm thinking, 2 years? How many comic books was this guy reading a day? I mean, he must have been reading piles a day to make it in that time. But he did. So he says. And what Douglas Woke is telling you, now this guy's a comic book fan, he's a writer, and he's making the assertion that all of the comic books that Marvel has printed all form one big story. It's all one big story. And most of what this book is he's singling out certain issues, which he liked a lot, and making a point about where in the Marvel story this issue was and how it contributed to the overarching Marvel saga. I'm not really convinced, and he never really did convince me that all the Marvel comics form one big story. To me, there are a bunch of other littler stories. It doesn't seem to be all one big story to me. I mean, by that logic, any shared universe is all one big story. You know, like all the Star Wars movies and shows, that's all one story. Every episode of Star Trek It's all one story. Nah, not really convinced. And then at the end of this book, there's an appendix. And it's this. It's Marvel Comics, a plot summary, which basically he tells you the summary of what happens in the Marvel Universe since the beginning. And that part really kind of convinced me that this isn't all one story, because it just reads as one damn thing after another. But, you know, he made a case. And I guess you can make a case for that kind of thing. I just wasn't convinced. There are a lot of things Woke says in this book that I don't really agree with. I won't go into them all, but that's the major one. It still was an entertaining book, and I'm still glad that I read it. It was fun. However, the most interesting thing, he doesn't talk about all that much, which is reading every Marvel comic between, you know, from 1962 to 2017. I mean, he talks a little bit about it, but not much, and that's what you want to know. You know, what's it like to read every single Marvel comic book? What does that do to your brain? How much of that did you read a day? I mean, how'd you find time to do all of that? He doesn't get into that too much, which is unfortunate, but still, fun book. Number 49, which I just picked this up. I wasn't expecting to read it, but I read that. Then I read book number 50. Yes, I read book number 50. Star Trek, for the Star Trek project I'm doing, where I'm reading every Star Trek book in publication order that I have. I don't have all the Star Trek books. That's like 800 something books. I got a lot of them though. And this was the first one by James Blish, which is 7 novelized episodes. Basically, he took episodes of Star Trek. He took the scripts. He had never seen the show at the time. And he wrote short stories off of those scripts. And it's very entertaining. I've read this a few times in my life, and it's always fun. And it was fun this time as well. I really enjoyed it. It takes no time to read because it's very small. How long is this book? It's 136 pages, and it just zips right along. It's a lot of fun if you're a Star Trek fan, which I am. So this was cool. So this was book number 50. Roger and I are going to be doing a retrospective video of our first 50 books for the challenge. That should be out on Thursday. Maybe on Thursday that'll be out. We'll see. That stuff isn't all that I read, though. Of course, I'm also doing the Superman and Batman challenge, the world's finest challenge, where I'm reading Batman and Superman every day of my life. I am almost finished with the Dark Knight Archives Volume 1, which has Golden Age Batman stories from the first 4 issues of Batman. It's really cool. There's Batman, you know, fighting a pirate because, you know, superheroes back in the days, every once in a while they had to fight a pirate. And, of course, I've been reading the Golden Age Superman, moving right along with this. Now, this is interesting because I got to the point in this where he had met his first kind of supervillain, which was the Ultra-Humanite, who was this old guy in a wheelchair who had tremendous scientific knowledge, which he used for evil. Basically, he used his genius to commit crimes because all he wanted to do is, you know, amass money and power like villains do. And Superman has many scrapes with this guy, but eventually the Ultra-Humanite is killed. But then Superman has an encounter with another villain, this young actress who turns villainous. And at one point, I'll get to this because it's so cool, Superman is looking at her, and there she is there, and he looks at her, and he sees her face and her eyes, and he says, "Those evil, blazing eyes. There's only one person on this earth who could possess them. Ultra! Yes! The Ultra-Humanite has returned. After he died, the Ultra-Humanite, one of his assistants, took his brain out of his dead body and put it in the body of a young movie star, a young female movie star. Which was an interesting choice. And so Ultra, now she's only known as Ultra, or he, or she, or they. I don't know the proper pronouns for Ultra. So the Ultra Humanite becomes a woman, which must have really weirded out the audience at this time because she died like the next adventure. She didn't last, the Ultra Humanite, and was promptly replaced by Lex Luthor, who was pretty much just like the Ultra Humanite. He was a genius, a scientific genius who just wants power. Basically, Lex Luthor wants to rule the world. He had hair, actually, in these early adventures. But Lex Luthor made his appearance. So the Golden Age Superman is rolling right along. Still, probably the most fun thing I'm doing is reading those comics. I did get a couple things in the mail. Comics. I got some comics. Nobody sent me any books this week. And I didn't find any free ones lying around. So I got some comics. And I didn't get any Epic collections this week. What's going on, Roger? Where are my Epic collections? No Epic collections this week. But I did get some Batman and Superman stuff for the World's Finest Challenge. I got this. This is Adventures of Superman Volume 1. Adventures of Superman was an anthology title which had Superman short stories in it. And I never read any of them. And so that's going to be cool. You know, it looks pretty fun. So yeah, The Adventures of Superman. Title taken from the fantastic 1950s television show. So I'm looking forward to reading that. And then I got some cool Batman stuff as well. I picked up Legends of the Dark Knight Annual from 1991. Duel is the story. From 1991, the Annual of Legends of the Dark Knight has some Jim Aparo art in here. I really like Jim Aparo. He's probably one of my favorite Batman artists. So that's in here. That's pretty cool. Get some cool stuff in here. Legends of the Dark Knight. This was a fun comic book with just different Batman adventures. And then I also picked up the 100th issue of Batman Legends of the Dark Knight with this fantastic Alex Ross cover. Of course, this features Robin. And here at the bottom, we have that wonderful scene from the Golden Age Batman when in the first issue where Robin appeared, he took this oath with Batman, you know, and they both took an oath to fight crime together. And this is that moment. Alex Ross just does a wonderful job with it, as he always does. And so, yeah, Legends of the Dark Knight, special 100th issue. What year was this? 1997 is when this came out. So that'll be fun as well. Probably the coolest thing I got, though, was this book. This is Batman the Dailies, 1943 to 1946. This has Batman comic strips. I have a Superman collection of comic strips as well, same format. So I might read both of those at the same time. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool, all these old Batman comic strips. You know, because Batman and Superman, they were both newspaper strips for years and years and years. And so here we go. 1943 to 1946. That's pretty cool. Has a old vintage Batmobile, the cool one. So that was all that stuff. The next thing I'm going to read, I finished Star Trek this morning, actually. And so tomorrow morning, I will start reading this. I'm going to jump in early for June on the Range. I know we have a few days left before June happens, but I'm going ahead and starting with Zane Grey, The Lone Star Ranger, which is Roger's pick for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club this month. The Lone Star Ranger, if you want to read it, you can get it on Project Gutenberg for free. Read along with the book club and join along with June on the Range. Going to have a June on the Range video up soon too. All kinds of excitement here at Stately Vaughn Manor. Oh, the thrills. Always so thrilling, Roger, around here. I will catch you next time.